Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Manic Candace podcast. It's your girl Candace back at it again with a brand new episode of the podcast. And today, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, this good night, we are going to discuss how I fell in love with my psychiatrist. Okay, not me, but this girl named Kendra, 2 hours away in Tucson. I'm in Phoenix. Um, she got on TikTok 2 weeks ago and she decided to tell the whole world how she fell in love with her psychiatrist. And the response has been very negative and with a lot of lack of empathy and a lack of care and a lack of awareness that there is someone with mental and clear mental illness going through a some type of mental breakdown. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, not a therapist. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a mental health patient, just like Kendra. So I have no room to judge her. But together tonight, we're going to watch her 25 plus part series on TikTok of how she fell in love with her psychiatrist, and we're going to dissect the signs that I see. I might pause here and there, but I'm going to dissect the signs of mental illness that I see. Signs that I've seen in myself over the years. I believe she is abusing ADHD meds and marijuana at the same time currently. I believe she is hypersensitive to stimulants, just like I am. I believe she is selling her ADHD coaching at the same time, using this opportunity to capitalize a little bit. So take what she says as a grain of salt. Keep in mind that this 25 part series that I'm about to show you is her second time recording this series um, to get more views. She's turned comments off by now. She has turned saving videos off by now. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch this through my screen here. So I'm going to minimize myself and I am going to share my screen here. And this is my TikTok. We're going to go to my favorites. So follow me on TikTok at Manic Candace. And here
I
we
fell in love with my psychiatrist, and he knew and he kept me until I had the strength to leave after 4 years. Here at part one. So, I decided to go back on ADHD meds after many years of being off of them.
So, like I said earlier, she's an ADHD coach, and I'm going to be pausing throughout the video. She's an ADHD coach, and she coaches people how to get off ADHD meds or how to manage their ADHD meds. And I just want to plug in my own podcast that I do have episodes of a mini series, sort of, about Adderall. So, if you have questions, concerns, or want to hear my story on Adderall or with Adderall, listen to those episodes. They all have Adderall in the titles. There's three of them. Um, she is about to sell her ADHD coaching in the next part. I won't pause for that, but she is clear. I want you guys to come into this listening mindset knowing she's on Vyvanse. Those are her ADHD meds. She did share with us she does take 10 milligrams per day. I call bullshit just on the amount of time she's been live and the amount of energy she has recording and how fast she's talking. I don't believe she's in a psychosis yet, but she's on her way there. If she keeps taking the ADHD medicine the way I'm thinking she's taking them, again, I'm not a doctor, but as someone who's abused ADHD meds before, I can call bullshit, and this is bullshit.
I was on them in my early 20s to help me get through college, and then I went off of them because they just weren't like the side effects were too much over the benefits. But then in my late 20s, I read this book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, and it absolutely changed my life. For my fellow ADHDers, there's so many good things in here. And the biggest thing that I took away was that it's very important for ADHDers to be on meds. So I decided to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. I just Googled psychiatry in the city that I lived in, and I went with the first one that came up, and I got an appointment within a month. And then I booked a 90-minute intake, and I show up to the intake, and this man is my age, and I can't help but notice that he's pretty attractive, this psychiatrist.
Okay, before I move forward, I want you to also keep in mind that she's only met the psychiatrist through Zoom. So although she appears to have met him in person, the way she's telling her story of how she first met her psychiatrist, this was all initially through Zoom, and she's only met him once, which was their last time meeting. So her part two.
I fell in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part two. So, in this intake, I kind of clocked that he was attractive in my age, but when I tell you that I've had a lot of couch time in my life, a lot of therapy, I just went right into it. I trusted him enough, of course, why wouldn't I, to tell him about my childhood trauma, my daddy issues, if you will, what I had went through, all of the relationship trauma that I had. I was 6 months sober at this time, but like all of the drinking and substance use I used to do. And he just listened and nodded. And that's the thing about psychiatrists, is that they're good at pretending to listen. They can appear connected, but that doesn't mean that they're always connected. So I just felt really seen. And I also told him, I was like, look, I don't want to be on stimulant meds. So he listened to me and he put me on the non stimulant ADHD med at the lowest dose just to figure out if it was going to work for me. I fell in love.
Okay, before I move to part three, sorry, I want to do this a lot, but before I move to part three, I want to point out some inconsistencies here. She says in the beginning of part one, I just got off my ADHD meds. And then she mentions that she wants to be put back on non-stimulant ADHD meds. That's why she's seeing the psychiatrist. And today she's on stimulants, Vyvanse, to be specific.
With my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part two. I was in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part three. So I hadn't ever seen a psychiatrist before. When I was on meds in my early 20s, I only got meds from my primary care physician. So I didn't understand how psychiatry works. So because he was figuring out my med dose, I saw him every month and he just made me feel like I was his friend. He was really, really funny and cracked jokes and told me he was impressed with my running that I would do. And yeah, so of course I loved the attention that I got from him. And it was in my third session with him, because at this point we were all on Zoom, that I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I call you by your first name? And he's Pakistani, so I said his first name wrong. And he said, well, it's pronounced this, but yes, of course you can. And he seemed so smug and happy with himself. And I know that that is because that was his first sign that him pretending like we're friends was working. And to be fair to me, I had only ever been to therapy before. I didn't realize that, it's important to call your doctor last name. I mean, I did know that. I did it with all my other doctors, but it just showed that the boundaries were blurring, and he liked that. So from then on, from my third session on, I started calling him his first name. And then he just started turning up the volume on us being friendly. And he would ask me, for the first 6 sessions, he asked me, after the meds, he said, how's your bowels, bladder, and appetite? And I would say they're all normal. And then he would ask me any thoughts of harm. And apparently that's pretty common for psychiatry to ask those
Yes,
questions. And
yes.
then on our 6th session, when things were really, the chemistry was starting to be there before, like I didn't realize it. I was like, oh, this man is just friendly. And he said, I have to ask this because it's a special interest of mine. But is there any thoughts of harm? Like I was special to him.
So for those of you who have never been to a psychiatrist before, if you're listening to this podcast and you have been a listener, you're probably a mental health patient as well, like me. Overall, this podcast is centered around discussions about mental health. And whenever mental health topics come up in the mainstream media and in social media, I want to talk about it and, capitalize on the hype. But one of the common questions that psychiatrists ask you when you're on medication is, are you having thoughts of harming yourself or others? And depending on your answer to that question could determine a lot of things, a lot of serious things. And she thinks that the psychiatrist is doing this on a romantic, personal level, asking this question of, is she having any thoughts of harming herself as like a sexual innuendo? And it's not that. She clearly lacks social skills. Number one, she's sharing this story, true or not, online for millions to see at this point. And she's connecting dots that are not there, which is a sign of mental illness.
And I said, no, no thoughts of harm. And he didn't ever ask me a clinical question again. He stopped asking me about my bladder, bowels, and appetite, and he stopped asking me about thoughts of harm. So I was seeing him every month and just gaining more and more respect for him because he would just tell me these little things about his successes and all of the cool things that he was doing in his life. And it made me fall for him, honestly. And he was really good at listening. And I mean, he's a Pisces, right? So of course he's going to be there and be able to go deep with my feelings, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't extracting from them. Anyway, so I would beg him to let me see him every week. Beg him because
Notice that she's very, very intense. And if you're not watching the video right now of her on Spotify or wherever you're listening, her eyes and her cadence and her intensity of her lips, the way she talks when she talks, it's very adamant. And a lot of people are speculating that this story isn't even true, but like at this point, even if it wasn't true and she's telling the story with this much conviction, I'd still consider it a sign of mental illness.
my therapist at the time, he was fine. You know, he wasn't a predator, but he was fine. He just wasn't doing very much for me. And so that therapist retired and I got a new therapist. And this new therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD, she was pretty helpful. So I stopped asking my psychiatrist, begging, honestly, to be my therapist and let me see him more, right? Which also should have been a red flag. But then I started focusing on this therapist. However, I would tell the therapist how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist, and she didn't do anything about it. She just was interested. She also loved stories about my dating life, and yeah, she also was getting supply from me in her own way, but that's for another part. So yeah, so I got a new therapist who actually helped me. She taught me CBT, EFT, all of these different modalities. And so I went back to just being okay with seeing Irfan once a month while he was giving me these little breadcrumbs of making me feel special, telling me about his professional achievements, telling me about how he's getting international recognition. And it worked. I was really impressed. I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist to see me weekly. And that is when the intermittent reinforcement started. Some sessions he'd be warm and kind and wonderful and let me in on little parts of his life and like be vulnerable with me or pretend. Other sessions, he would be cold and clinical and detached. And you know what that did? It made me work harder in our next sessions. It did. And it started the addiction that I had to him. 100%. And he knew exactly what he was doing. This man gives lectures on trauma and attachment theory. He used his psychiatric training to manipulate me and get me hooked. And guess what? It worked. In January of 2024, I was hit by a car turning left as I was going through a green light. And it was the night before my appointment, my next appointment with my psychiatrist. So I was like, okay, I'll still be able to go to my appointment on Zoom. I'm okay. But I did make an appointment with an urgent care the next day just to get checked out. I had bruising on my abdomen and a perforated eardrum. And the provider at the urgent care said, I do not feel comfortable treating you. You need to seek emergency care now. You may be internally bleeding. But it was 11 o'clock in the morning, and my appointment with my psychiatrist was at 2. So I decided that I was going to wait so I could see my psychiatrist and not have to reschedule, because I was looking forward to my appointment with him so much. I look back at that time and I'm just like, oh my God, I put my own life under seeing him. I was fully addicted to him at this point. And you know what happened is that I showed up and I told him that I may be internally bleeding, and he didn't stop the appointment. He didn't say, you need to take care of yourself, go get emergency care now. He let me continue and just tell him about how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. Because that was really what most of our appointments were, is me just like pouring myself out, because he was so good at the intermittent reinforcement. Yeah, I got some warmth from him that appointment. So that was January 2023. And I also told my therapist about this. She said nothing. I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist. After I risked my life to see him, that's when he really started turning up the intimacy in our appointments. However, he was really smart and knew the professional lines like the back of his hand. So he would comment on my appearance, but not compliment my appearance. So I would come on screen and he would say, oh, you curled your hair. Or I would come on screen and he would say, oh, you're wearing glasses. And of course I felt seen and excited that he was noticing these things about me. I didn't realize at this time that he had feelings for me too. I thought I was holding them all by myself. So I was so excited when he noticed my glasses that I ran and showed him my other pair, and he said, I prefer turtle shell glasses. So even though I usually wear contacts, I'm wearing these turtle shell glasses in these videos because just in case he sees them ever, he'll see me in his favorite glasses. He did tell me he likes the turtle shell. Anyway, it was just inappropriate things like that, little teeny things that he let me in. And all this time, my best friend is an emergency medicine physician. And she told me, she said, Kendra, one of these days, your psychiatrist, she would use his name, is going to say, I can't be your doctor anymore. I want to be with you. I want to be with you so bad. I can't be your doctor. I'll see you in 2 years. So my best friend, who's a doctor, she picks up on stuff like that. So even she knew that our relationship was crossing boundaries and getting weird, but that became my dream, was for my psychiatrist, I almost use his name, to do that. And I told him about Brianna saying that, my best friend, who's the emergency medical doc. I told him that she would tell me that, and he just would be silent. He didn't disagree, but he didn't agree, and that was weaponized neutrality was his favorite game to play, right? He didn't disagree with Brianna telling me that my psychiatrist had feelings for me, but he also didn't say that's inappropriate. Let's change the subject. It was also around.
So I'm studying right now, and part of what I'm studying is arguments and what is a sound argument and what is a bad argument, and then what components of an argument are, and such. And she makes a lot of assumptions. She likes to say, just because he said no doesn't mean he said yes. Well, her reasoning is very, I want you to notice when she says, he didn't he didn't agree, but he didn't disagree. Like the word maybe is a very probably like means a lot to her. Um, she's very hopeful, and she mentions that she almost said her psychiatrist's name. Later on, she does eventually end up saying his name, and people did find him. People did find out who his family is, and I wonder if they found out by now where he practices, but shit. He is a brown man. So I mean like he may be Indian based off his name, but she says later on, so we'll keep watching.
This time that I asked my psychiatrist if he had diagnosed me with anything other than ADHD when I had my initial diagnosis. And he said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Oh, what did you diagnose me with?" And he said, "Well, you had a lot of traumatic things happen to you in childhood because of your dad. And so I diagnosed you with other trauma and stressor related disorder." And that was the first little ping that I got of like, that was weird. Why would he keep that from me? I asked Matt, like, why wouldn't he tell me that? That seems important. He didn't tell me because he was using that information to manipulate me. He knew I had trauma and stressor disorder, and instead of helping me heal from it and telling me about it, he used it against me. After I risked my January 2023, at this point, I was full blown obsessed with my psychiatrist, and my therapist wasn't helping me. My psychiatrist wasn't helping me. He was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend. And at first, my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen, but then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't never say, "This isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot." Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life. And I didn't get too deep, but about a year and a half in, and I would send my psychiatrist these emails just about how much I liked him and how I was so grateful for him, and put in a bunch of heart emojis. And this is really when he should have transferred my care, but he waited. He liked what I gave him too much. And so, even though my boyfriend did not meet my needs, my psychiatrist and my therapist both were like, "You have to stay with him. There's nothing wrong with him not meeting your needs." I'm like, okay. And my psychiatrist was like, "He's perfect. Don't get wrong with him." And what was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. So my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did. I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after like more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom. And so I went to my therapist and she asked me, "What does your psychiatrist think about this?" And I said, "I don't know. I haven't talked to my psychiatrist about this stuff because I have a crush on my psychiatrist and I don't want to tell him this intimate of stuff." And she said, "Well, you should tell him because I want a male's perspective." So at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, I told him, I said, "Today we're going to talk about my intimate life." And he said, "Oh." I said, "Yes. My psychologist, my therapist, asked what your opinion on it was. And I told her that I don't talk to you about this intimate stuff because I have a crush on you." And he looked down and smiled so big in that moment. He smiled so big. And I loved it. It's so gross thinking about it. And then I proceeded to give him 30 minutes of non-stop content about my intimate life with my boyfriend. And I actually recorded the whole thing because I was so excited about it. But now it makes me sick. I can't even listen to the recording. I've tried to start, but it's gross. Any ethical psychiatrist would have stopped me and said, Kendra, let's talk about your meds. Let's talk about your care. At this point, my meds were stable. And I was still seeing him every month. Yeah, that was a rough time. And it was pretty much his Christmas morning, the almost 2.5 years of grooming me to get me to talk about sexual things with him worked. And he got 30 minutes of nonstop content to use. I need to address three things. One, people are asking me what my mental health diagnosis is. I do not have BPD. I do not have psychosis. I have ADHD, and I was experiencing extreme limerence.
She just listed out her diagnoses, multiple diagnoses of mental health disorders, and I have ADHD and I feel offended. I don't when I when I have in the past abused my ADHD meds and gotten online, this is exactly how I acted, but through other social media platforms. So it is my humble opinion, if I haven't made it obvious by now, she is high on Vyvanse. She's high on marijuana. She's high on both. She's hiding it to most people, but I think a lot of us can recognize that she is clearly high out of her mind. I'm just saying.
With my psychiatrist. Limerence is a normal thing to happen to anyone who is experiencing hot and cold behavior from someone. And it happens more often in people with ADHD because we have dopamine dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria. And guess what? My psychiatrist knew that and used it to his advantage. Two, I accidentally said my psychiatrist's first name in one of my videos. If you clocked it, good for you. I do not owe him anonymity. However, this is not about doxing my psychiatrist. This is about me sharing my story so other people can view predatory behavior in people in power. Okay? If anyone doxes my psychiatrist with his last name or city that he works in or clinic that he works in, your comment will be immediately deleted and you will be blocked. This is about protecting other victims, not doxing my psychiatrist. If you do some investigative work and you want to DM me about it, I'm open to that. Okay? Three, I need to take a moment. Moment taken. It is so incredibly disturbing to me the amount of people that are predator protectors in my comments, that are victim blaming me, especially the mental health practitioners in my comments using therapy speak to say that this situation that I was in was my fault or that I was
One thing that I want to note about Kendra that I've noticed is that she's very smart, but she's not wise. You can be smart and not wise, you know. The emptiest wagon makes the most noise. I'll let that sink in. The emptiest wagon makes the most noise. And she is much like an empty wagon. Um, her speech right now is highly dysregulated. She's having to take moments to pause and breathe because her thoughts are coming out faster than her words. She's very manipulative. She's trying very hard to spin this whole narrative of that her psychiatrist is in love with her or that she is being manipulated by her psychiatrist to fall in love with her or to be in limerence or whatever. It's not working. It's a lie that it's a delusion that she is believing, she has believed and is sharing. Um hence the word delusional on the screen here. Um, wow. We are about a third of the way there. So bear with us. Bear with me.
Delusional. Check yourself. You're giving me more ammunition to share my story because it just goes to show how absolutely messed up the mental health industry is and how protected people who do this kind of sick psychological manipulation are. So I will continue with my story tomorrow. I will. Welcome back to another installment of I Was in Love with My Psychiatrist and He Kept Me Anyway, Part 8. You all did some nasty work last night, and I had to turn off comments. People started posting my psychiatrist's first and last name, his picture in the comments. That was a jump scare. So, yeah, a few bad actors who wanted to be super sleuths got the privilege of commenting, mostly hate, let's be real, taken away for everyone. So at this point in the story, there are two main players. My psychiatrist, who's my age, who crossed major ethical boundaries, and my therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD. Neither of these people at this point in the story I knew were crossing boundaries. I thought that everything was hunky-dory and that I was just in love with my psychiatrist and it was totally normal. Little did I know he was manufacturing everything so I could fall in love with him, because it was on him to set the professional boundary and not let attention build. So days after my psychiatrist's Christmas morning appointment from a few videos back, where he got a crush confession from me, and then 30 minutes of non-stop intimate content that he did not stop me, my boyfriend and I broke up days later. So then I started dating this other guy. And this other guy, this new guy, was a therapist. And I was like, oh, great. Someone who will be able to emotionally meet my needs. Yeah, I'm not going to date another therapist again. So this therapist and I, we went for coffee. It was nice. Our second date was a hike. And on this hike, this therapist starts telling me about how he has a crush on one of his clients. And I thought to myself, okay, this is strange, but go ahead. Like, we're on a date, dude. Why are you telling me about a crush on one of your clients? But go off, King. So then he was saying, yeah, she's so attractive, and I think she likes me too. I go and visit her at work, and her coworkers say, oh, so-and-so talks about you all the time. And I was like, okay, where does she work? And he said, well, I shouldn't tell you that because I really shouldn't be visiting her anyway. I was like, okay. No.
Okay. At this point in the series, and at this point in her current story about her second therapist having a crush on someone who she's gonna later speculate, shocking as her, I can't take it anymore. When I was first watching this 2 weeks ago, I stopped way early on, and if you made it thus far, I'm surprised. But let's go to her profile. It's public. She now has 107.4K followers and almost 650,000 likes, almost a million likes. And to be honest, you guys, if when I was high on Adderall, on way too much Adderall, more Adderall than I should have been taking, I took so much that I got into an amphetamine-induced psychosis. I'm not saying she's in a psychosis, but I'm saying she's well on her way there if she keeps this up, if this attention keeps going. And like that's the one thing that is a drug in and of itself is attention. And when you combine being high on stimulants and attention, I mean, she's getting millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of views in a very, 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 very short amount of time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. and come back to center. Hi. Behind me is my beautiful view of downtown Phoenix. It's blurred out right now, but who cares? I wrote down a few notes. Love my notes, right? I wrote down a few notes to hear just the kind of like things that I noticed in her behavior as she was telling the story. Um, like I said earlier, she connects dots that are not there. She has no social skills. She acts like a narcissist. I'm not sure if she is one. She dropped her psychiatrist's name, and from that incident, whether it was on purpose or not, other people started to find his place of practice, his last name, and just a lot of personal information. Um, Her behavior is exacerbated by her use of Vyvanse. And I'm going to argue that she's on other drugs, such as marijuana. When you combine the two, you can be very, um, how should I say this? Acts and thoughts of grandeur. You can act and think like you are bigger and better than you really are. I'm not trying to shade her. It's just something I noticed. And dysregulated speech. She's talking really fast. She is having a hard time catching her breath while she's speaking. Um, and frankly, she's not making sense in any story time, in any series that she's posting. She's going live every single day. She's been live today. Um, I'm very surprised no one has put in a petition to the Superior Court of Arizona to have her evaluated against her will. Um, this is very serious. If you have a loved one that is going through something like this, especially online when they're posting online, whether they have an audience of millions or not, please do your best to intervene. She should have been, someone should have stepped in and taken control and, way before she got viral on TikTok. There were clearly signs there. I've looked, but I'll link um my TikTok so you can find the story playlist if you want to watch all of it. I'm not going to put all of it on here for copyright reasons and for, frankly, I can't take it anymore. I it's exhausting hearing her talk. And I'm just done for the night. So thank you for listening to the Man Candace podcast. I appreciate you. Please share this episode with your friends, family, and your followers, and I bid you adieu, mes amis. Bye-bye.